Hi, I'm Peter Rao.
And I'm Mike Doran.
Welcome to Counterbalance.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Counterbalance.
Welcome back to Counterbalance. I just assume we have so many first-time listeners and viewers, Mike, that I have to say welcome to Counterbalance. Today, we're joined by our colleague, who's an adjunct fellow here at Hudson, Ezra Cohen. Ezra, you are being welcomed back to Counterbalance since you've been on the show before, although it's been a few years.
Welcome back, Ezra.
It's been a while since we last spoke. We've gotten out of Afghanistan, which is what the conversation we had last time was
Oh,
about.
right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Afghanistan, what was that?
Yeah,
Long time ago, huh?
yeah, that was something.
Smooth.
Those of you who may need a refresher on who Ezra is the former acting Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security and Director for Defense Intelligence at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI. He was previous to that the Acting Assistant Secretary for Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict, SOLIC, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, SOLIC, and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Counter-Narcotics and Global Threats.
Too many things to his name at such a young age.
That's true.
It's really...
I don't sleep.
Those of you who are
too much ambition.
listening and not watching, Ezra Cut's a dashing young figure here, hence Mike's comment. He was also on the NSC at the DOD. I'm also told that you are now, as of last year, a budding legal mind, a lawyer. So we'll have to very carefully parse every word that Ezra utters here.
Another reason not to trust you. Too many things, too many achievements to your name too early, and you're a lawyer. You know, you are also one of our favorite guests. You have a MAGA following. So you bring out our MAGA audience.
Mega or MAGA or both?
MAGA. MAGA.
I think last time I was on, I made a small joke about you had misspoken, and I very quickly jumped on that, and it actually turned into a meme.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't see that.
Yes.
What do you?
Yes.
Can you remind me?
I think it was something you said. We don't have viewers. We only have listeners.
Oh yeah.
And then I said, and then you later on came back and said, people that are watching. And I said, I thought we don't have viewers. And anyway, people kind of piled onto that.
Now I didn't know that. Now we have viewers and listeners.
It turns out you didn't even need that legal training. You were already...
I'm always listening. Always listening.
Well, let's dive right in, and maybe we'll just start with the inner workings of the Defense Department. Secretary Austin's been much in the news in recent weeks, and at this point, maybe even months, because he was hospitalized, as everyone knows, late last year. But everyone didn't know at the time. The White House wasn't informed. The president didn't know for quite some time. What should we think about this story, Ezra? How bad is it, and what does it say or mean about the chain of command or the Defense Department or the Secretary?
Yeah, so first of all, obviously I hope he makes a full recovery. Originally they had said that he had an optional medical procedure, but then we learned that it was to treat cancer. And, so again, I really hope he makes a full recovery. I think that just kind of taking it up a level here, more than just not letting your boss know, is the fact that he is a key link in the National Command Authority. The integrity of the National Command Authority has a very large deterrent effect. In the eyes of our adversaries, the idea that the president can pass unambiguous commands to the military at any time of day, any time of the year, is something that certainly makes our adversaries think twice about striking the United States. The fact that there was ambiguity in that chain, I think we now know that the president didn't know that he was incapacitated, is concerning, because had our enemies been and our adversaries been observing the status of the National Command Authority. And again, I would say it's probably likely they are looking at that. And if they had come to the realization that there was an interruption in the National Command Authority, it could have invited an attack. China could have said, hey, there's ambiguity now. This is the time to strike, because there could be a delayed American response, because the president might not be able to pass unambiguous, clear orders through the Secretary of Defense to his forces. So I think that that's really the concerning thing here, not whether or not, Congress was notified or if the media was told. I saw a lot of people in the media who immediately made it about them. Oh, well, we didn't know. That's really not the concerning thing. It's the fact that the president was not fully aware of the status of the chain of command.
Ezra, you just got back from Israel.
Sure.
Why don't you just? I also just got back. Why don't you just give us some of your top line impressions?
Yeah, I think that I actually feel optimistic after returning. I think a lot of people who read the New York Times, I could see how they would become very pessimistic about the situation, but having sat with both the prime minister and also the what I would say is the de facto leader of the opposition, but who's now joined the government, Benny Gantz, I feel quite optimistic because I think both of them are thinking about the future, a stable government together that is removes a lot of the most radical elements of both sides. And I think you will see a unity government. I think that that's what's going to be next, and that's what people expect. I also sat with the troops, some of the troops who had come back who had been injured, and what we heard from them was, one, we need unity. We need to continue this fight to eradicate Hamas. We need unity, and also, though, they said that when they're inside of Gaza fighting, they feel victory. They feel that they're increasingly close to victory. And so I think you need a stable government that's going to allow them to prosecute this war. And frankly, look, the United States needs that too. Israel is at the vanguard against Iran. It's something that you and I have talked about before. And an unstable Israel from a political perspective is just bad for the United States.
I just wanted to, I can't agree with you more. One of the things that my pet peeves is the way people talk about our policy toward Israel, like this is some kind of favor we're doing to Israel or for Israel, rather than what we're doing for ourselves. And it's so often the conversation about foreign policy in general, but especially about Israel, it devolves into this question about whether they deserve it, don't deserve it, instead of starting from the point of view of what's the American interest here.
The American interest is very, very strong, and again, I can't go into all the specifics here, just things that shouldn't be talked about, even if they do show up in the New York Times, but the partnership between Israel, especially in the past administration, in the Trump administration, kept Iran off balance. And it also gave them the perception that the U.S. and Israel and its allies could strike inside of Iran at any moment, any place. And having pulled back now on that, is to the detriment of the United States. I mean, you don't have to look any further than our own hemisphere. I mean, Iran is active in our own hemisphere. They're active in the United States.
And they're going to get more, and they're going to get more active.
Yeah. And Israel's presence out there, putting pressure on Iran in their own, neighborhood, is very much to our benefit. It keeps them from feeling more able to do things in the Western Hemisphere. I think, one other thing I'll just say, one other major reflection, and it's connected to this, is that everywhere I went, and I'm sure you heard this too, this just disbelief that the United States has not struck back harder against the Houthis in Yemen. And the expression that this weakness, American weakness, is really the cause of this instability to begin with. It's the American weakness is part of the cause of why Hamas chose to strike when they did. And I heard that from all across the political spectrum in Israel.
To take you back to what you opened with, which is meeting with both the prime minister and the de facto leader of the opposition, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, I think oftentimes in the U.S. context, and maybe through the prism of the New York Times, since you've raised it a few times, there's this superficial embrace of Netanyahu by the Biden administration, but they like to brief to our elite media quite a bit of, I think, disparaging takes on Netanyahu, and I don't think it's any secret that going back years, Biden and Netanyahu have been anything but the closest of friends. What you're saying, though, is that what the Biden team at times suggests, that there is a Netanyahu position, and they like to almost like a company going bankrupt in a restructuring, put their bad assets into one part of the company and then the good assets in the other. Netanyahu represents all that is wrong. He gives a national address about the viability of a two-state solution, for example. But then there is a sunny, positive opposition that we can work with. You're saying that these aren't Netanyahu positions, they're Israeli positions. Is that a fair reading of what you're suggesting?
I think that the principal two concerns in Israel right now are, one, bringing the hostages home. Just as you would expect, the hostages' families take the position that one more minute is a minute too much, right? The hostages need to come home now. So that's priority one. Priority two is defeating Hamas, so this never happens again. Priority three is dealing with the root cause of this, which is Iran. All of those are things that are very much in the U.S. interest. I think that the Biden administration doesn't like Netanyahu at this point in time, or they're at least that's the impression you get from what is leaked to the press, because he's making the United States look bad. I mean, he is projecting more strength than the United States. That reflects very badly on the U.S. I think that that's certainly at play. I also think that that at the end of the day, the Israeli people want a government that is going to be able to bring about those three things. If that's a unity government that includes Net Bibi, then so be it.
I agree with you, but I with a slight nuance. I think the thing that bothers them about Netanyahu the most is that he has a voice that really carries into American domestic politics. Benny Gantz cannot give a speech that really makes the average American voter listen. My mother passed away recently, but my mother, yeah, thank you. But she was 91, and she had been out of the United States only once, which was to come to my wedding, which was in Britain. But so what I mean is, did not have a college education, did not pay attention to international politics, did not go abroad. She really liked Benjamin Netanyahu. That's just foreign politicians do not have reach into American domestic politics like that. It's really amazing, and he's able to talk to the American voter and also to say, your government is not standing up to a nuclear Iran. And he, of course, under Obama famously did that and gave the speech before both houses of Congress.
I think that's
they want to knock him out for that reason.
But I think that's really similar to what I was saying in the sense that
Yeah, I'm not really disagreeing with you. I'm just, it's just that I just wanted to focus in on that one trait. That's what really sticks in their craw.
Yeah, and I think that maybe the issue of accentuating the weakness of the United States is greater because of the fact that he speaks into the U.S. I think that that's true. I also think that, if you look at a good example would be the interview that Netanyahu did with Meet the Press over the summer before the Hamas attack. And there was a lot of commentary. Like, wow, he handled Chuck Todd at the time better than any American politician has ever handled Chuck Todd. He is an extremely intelligent, quick, and frankly charismatic person.
He's one of the great politicians of the age. And there are that many in the West. They just don't exist.
Absolutely. And one other thing I think that is an issue for the Biden administration is that at the end of the day, after some delay, they wanted to put their stamp on the Abraham Accords. If you remember, they first rejected the Abraham Accords.
I wouldn't say the words.
They didn't want to say the name. But then all of a sudden, it became about, we want to expand the Abraham Accords so that we can, and that really, the Trump Abraham Accords was really the easier thing. They bit off the easier part of the apple. That wasn't that hard. We're going to do the really hard thing, which is bring Saudi into this.
And resurrect the two-state solution and the Palestinian Authority in the same move.
Well, they linked the two together. I mean, I think that this is the problem, right? So they linked the two together, and they haven't had many foreign policy accomplishments. If anything, you've seen just this increasing instability, and this was their chance. And then what happened? The attack on October 7th. And I think that they are still racing to try to get this deal done with Saudi, which means, making these concessions on things like the two-state solution. Of course, that's just never going to – both sides in Israel right now are saying we cannot talk about the two-state solution now. But if you're the Biden administration and you're looking, how can we get a foreign policy success before the election so that we can claim that we've done something internationally, maybe get some more votes? You've got to push Israel into this very, very bad deal so that you can just kind of get that win. And I think that that's part of what's going on here.
As an intelligence professional, what are your top line thoughts when you think of October 7th?
Well, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see that there was a major intelligence failure. I mean, anytime you miss an attack, especially when you have a very, very advanced, well-funded intelligence apparatus behind you, it's an intelligence failure. Now, the nature of the intelligence failure is a different question. Did they have all the pieces? Did they collect the right information? And then they just simply didn't analyze it or put the pieces together, right? Basically what happened to us on 9/11. There have been some reports that there were assessments that were done by lower levels and they were disregarded by the upper levels, essentially until it was too late. I think that my inclination is from speaking to people there, but also just reading what's generally out there. It seems to me like they had the pieces of the information. And it was a typical thing that you even see in the United States. Leaders don't want bad news, and so they will discount things that don't fit with the image that they want to have or the outcome that they want to have. And I think that that's unfortunately what happened here. With that said, I also think there's a failure in the United States as well.
I was gonna raise that. Go ahead. I wanna. That's.
Hey, Ezra, before I go there, do you think there's a failure in the United States as well? Tell us what you think.
Well, without question, look. Anytime you have, what happened on October 7th, right? You had one of our closest allies that is extremely well armed, with many different flavors of weaponry, and I'll just leave it at that, attacked. Israel got very lucky in a sense that they were able to contain the people that came across the border from Gaza to the areas immediately around Gaza. That is to say, you didn't have people get to central Israel or into the middle of the Negev, where some of Israel's most sensitive research sites are. You didn't have people get to Tel Aviv. You didn't have people get to Tel Aviv.
You're a professional.
And so I think that they got lucky in that sense. But the reason I'm mentioning that is because the U.S. should be monitoring threats to any well-armed close ally.
The United States is being attacked by Iran or by Iran's proxies, or under the command and control of Iran, as a result of this. So this is this is something that we have to be on top of. But there hasn't been any debate here about the American intelligence failure, has there?
Well, I did see Mike Morrell come out and say,
"Oh, did he?"
Yeah, he had a genius
former
deputy
of
CIA.
the Mossad.
Right?
No, the CIA is one.
Deputy director of CIA, Mike Morrell. He had a absolutely brilliant, well-informed comment that there was no American intelligence failure because the U.S. had no interest in monitoring this situation, which of course is just completely preposterous. For the reason I just said, which is it's a well-armed person, but two, for
why would he say such a thing? That's the silliest.
I don't know. Maybe
that's one of the silliest things I've heard about this conflict.
Yeah, he must have some friends there that he doesn't want to offend.
Oh, right.
Morell was also President Bush's PDB briefer on 9/11.
Was he?
Yeah.
Huh. The one thing I like
Little
about
fun
him,
fact
I don't
for
know
you
him, don't
out
know him
there.
at all, but I can't cite you chapter and verse, but he did suggest that aspects of Russiagate were bullshit. Or am I allowed to say bullshit on our podcast?
You just did.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is it okay? And I gave him credit for that because everyone else in his ambit was going along with it.
Well, I think so. The second reason this is a U.S. intelligence failure is for exactly what you said, like the risk of escalation, right? Like obviously a massive attack on the U.S. from an Iranian or on Israel from an Iranian proxy can escalate very quickly into attacks on the U.S.
Pulled an aircraft carrier into the region.
This is not like we're not involved in this.
And so, but what I think what you do see in the U.S. and there's no question, look, the U.S. intelligence community has a lot of priorities, and there are a lot of things around the world that the U.S. intelligence community has to monitor. Now, we also spend an enormous amount of money on the U.S. intelligence community. I can't give you the exact number, but it's a very large number. It's probably well over $100 billion a year. And when you're spending that much money, there's an expectation, I think, amongst policymakers that you would catch something like this. Now, the issue, what I also think this points at is everything can't be a number one priority. And so this is really where you have to have experienced policymakers that make the call on what's priority one, what's priority two, what's priority three, and so on, so that you can actually get. And so again, I just come back to the fact that, look, the adults are back in charge, Mike, and the adults decided that this was not a priority one. That this was not a priority one.
You can ask about the research sites in the Negev next. Or should we go
he knows more about that than I do.
Give us the zoom out. So you gave us the on the ground, the specifics of the operation. Take us out to Iran. You already referenced the Houthis. Is America's position one of Mike's favorite metaphors, like a house in Malibu? It's going slowly until it goes all at once. How are we faring? Who's winning?
Yeah. So look, I have no doubt in my mind after being there that Israel is going to win this conflict. I think the U.S. is going to win this conflict. This comes down to taking a harder line against Iran. So, obviously, I mean, I think one of the reasons the hostages aren't out right now is they aren't feeling pressure. The Hamas is not feeling pressure to get them out. Qatar is not feeling pressure. And I do want to talk about Qatar. Maybe I'll come back to this. But
I'm not going to let you.
Well, wait.
I'm not going to let you.
What's your position on that?
Every minute that we spend talking about something other than Iran is a wasted minute.
I think, except when that is there.
How did I even let you get on this conversation? Go.
No. Well, but Mike, I just want to come back to that, right? I mean, so the Qataris are the Iranians' front to the kind of mainstream world community, right?
I really don't believe that. They are.
Well, tell me why not?
Because we don't have. Well, maybe it isn't interesting to talk about it, but Qatar is a tiny country, and if we have our Iran policy right, we can vector them into a much better position. The problem, everything stems, all of our problems in the Middle East start with the fact that we are vectored incorrectly with Iran. And we vectored everybody else. I mean, we pushed the Saudis into rapprochement with Iran.
Right.
We're the administration, every moment, every day they wake up, they're thinking, oh no, our policy of stabilizing the region by reaching out to Iran is going to fall apart if we don't keep Israel from attacking Hezbollah, if we don't keep the Houthis from, if we escalate too much against the Houthis and so on. So we restrained ourselves all around the region in order to maintain this outreach to Iran, which has pushed all of our allies, including the Qataris, including the Saudis, including the UAE. The UAE spends half of its time, and they send one guy to Israel, or beautiful young ladies to Israel to speak perfect Hebrew and tell them that they love Jews more than anyone else in the world, and then they send somebody else quietly to Tehran to tell them the same thing in Farsi, and that's not a knock against them. That's what they have to do. They're a small country whose entire economy can be destroyed by one volley of missiles from Iran. It's our mistake.
So I agree that Qatar is a problem. The fact that Qatar is a problem is very much of our own making.
Yes,
I do agree with that. However, there's another kind of ingredient there. It's not.
We have to go to commercial, I believe, and I'm just kidding.
Oh, you do? Okay, so it's
stay tuned.
It's not by chance that every single terrorist group that has threatened the United States happens to be all rosy with Qatar. Okay, that's not just our making.
Oh, but that's a lot of our making. We want them there, and the Israelis. The Israelis wanted. It's unpleasant to talk about this after October 7th. The Israelis wanted the Qatari money flowing into.
But by the way, so I think that there were the salaries that were paid to Hamas, and that Israel wanted to do that to try to stabilize the situation. They incorrectly thought Netanyahu.
The whole security establishment, including Netanyahu, they all had the idea that we can create a kinder, gentler Hamas.
And that was clearly a mistake. And I think that there is, if you talk to these people, there is a wide agreement now that was a mistake. It was wishful thinking. However, that's only one of the funding streams that Qatar was sending to Hamas. There was also other money that we now know about that was largely used not for paying the salaries, but actually for arming and building the tunnel networks for military purposes. So there were two things.
If we don't want our allies to hedge toward Iran, then we shouldn't hedge toward Iran. I couldn't agree more. And look, Anthony Blinken right after October 7th went to Doha, and he's standing there on the podium, and somebody from some press service asked him, are you gonna? I can't remember. Are you gonna take a harder line with the Qataris? They asked him in Doha, and he said no. Why? Because they want, the United States now wants the Qataris to play this mediation role.
Yeah,
which they're playing better than.
They're not just doing it there; they're also doing it with the hostages we had in Venezuela. They're doing it with the Taliban. Yeah. I get it. This is where I'm saying this is a problem of our own making. However, it's a problem of our own making because Qatar had good relationships with these people that are that predate the U.S. going to them for help.
We can moderate all. Anyway,
sorry, we'll get off this.
We don't need to go on and on. We'll get off. Our difference of opinion is clear. I think. Right?
I think it's minimal difference of opinion.
Because it's Iran. We can agree on that.
Yes.
Priority is Iran.
Priority.
There are a lot of people out there. I don't want to give the aid and comfort to the enemy. I'm talking about the enemy in the policy world, right? Who want to deflect attention from Biden's Iran outreach as the key thing. And so anytime we talk about anybody else, whether it's the Qataris or the Turks,
there's no question that the just completely mindless rush for rapprochement with Iran, without asking pretty much anything in return from them.
Nothing. We gave it all away.
There's no question that was an incredibly inviting move that has invited all of this instability across the Middle East. And also, by the way, they still haven't really moved off of it. Which is why this is why the Iranians do not believe that the limited strikes we've had in Yemen are anything more than just a political move for the U.S. to try to get people in Congress to shut up, because they still have not fully moved off of this idea that we're going to have this great peace with the mullahs. So it's not just like we need to strike harder in Yemen. We really have to put to bed this idea that we can live with the current government of Iran.
Totally.
We've got to put that to bed.
Sorry, Peter.
No, we're in the Middle East. I understand.
Yeah, it's the Middle East. Yeah. Ezra struck a nerve. But how do we start I'm asking you as an intelligence professional, how do we start a debate here in Washington about the American intelligence failure on October 7th? Is it worth trying to do that? And how would you go about doing that?
Well, look, I mean, this is something that is, very ripe for the DOD inspector, or excuse me, the IC inspector general to take a look at. I think there needs to be a deep dive on that. I also think that, frankly, the National Intelligence Council probably should stand up a small group of analysts, senior analysts, to really look at this and see what we missed. There's no question that Hamas was not a top priority. Monitoring Hamas was not a top priority. And so I think that the question is going to be, did we have any reflections from the groups that we are monitoring carefully? So Iran, Hezbollah, did we see any reflections within those groups that this attack was coming?
But I also think that the two discussions are interrelated, because the Biden administration's policy stance, which is to avoid escalation at all costs, puts enormous pressure on the intelligence community, because the playbook for countering a government like the Biden government, which is so desperate to avoid escalation, is to salami slice tactic your way up the escalatory ladder, knowing that the administration is going to pull back compartmentalized regions. There's Yemen, there's Syria, there's Iraq, there's Lebanon. Not only are the Iranians prepared to fight to the last era, but they know that there's no escalation, beyond that to Iran proper. So then the intelligence community has to, because it doesn't have policy backing, cover an enormous amount of incoming flak, from attacks in Iraq and Syria to Yemen to Lebanon. In a way, it is an intelligence failure, but it's also a policy failure that kind of spawned that intelligence failure.
Again, the priorities of the intelligence community are set by the National Security Council at the direction of the president. Full stop. That's where the priorities come from. There's a document called the President's Intelligence Priorities Framework, or the President's Intelligence Priorities.
I'd love to see that document.
And that is where, and that is the president's priority, and that filters down.
Rising oceans.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
So you've got the PIP. That's the President's Intelligence Priorities. That then filter down. Those then filter down to something called the NIPIF, which is the National Intelligence Priorities Framework, which is set by the DNI, and it's based off of the president's priorities. And that is actually how money is distributed within the IC. So essentially, if you're a priority 1, you're going to get more funding than if you're a priority 3. So that really does have meaningful impact, right? It means less manpower, less capability. So if you drop down Hamas, it's very easy to see how you miss this. Now, one other thing, and I think that goes to your point. See, in the Trump administration, we had this idea of an Iranian threat network. It's not new, but we elevated that. And the idea is we were looking at the destabilizing activity around the world, not just in the Middle East, not just right on Iran's borders, but including in the Western Hemisphere. And that drives more focus, more funding, and I believe we would have caught something like that.
And looking at it as a network, I'm willing to bet a lot of money that the slogans of the Biden administration about de-escalation, depressurizing, and this tendency that you see very clearly with regard to the maritime border agreement between Israel and Lebanon, that is a negotiation with Hezbollah, the negotiations facilitated by the United States between the Saudis and the Houthis, that there's a pronounced tendency on the part of the Biden administration to see the Middle East as a bunch of trees rather than an Iranian forest, or to see the Iranian threat network as a lot of individual trees rather than a single forest. And they would have seen, Jake Sullivan in that famous Foreign Affairs article where he had all these embarrassing boasts about the success of the de-escalation and depressurizing. He specifically mentioned the fact that there had been quiet between Hamas and Israel, and negotiations going on and interaction like never before. All of those kinds of sense of policy success has got to influence the intelligence community as well.
Well, there's another kind of policy intelligence failure here, which is one, was our intelligence sharing relationship with Israel affected by policy decisions?
That's an interesting question.
And so that
Why
is...
don't you unpack that a little bit? That's a very interesting question.
So,
I can see lots of threads there.
So look, you have engagements between countries at many levels. The intel relationship usually follows the policy, the upper level policy decision making. So if a decision was made at the policy level to do things that were not in what Israel saw as its interest, for instance, we're going to make friends with Iran, that could have caused the Israelis to pull back on the intelligence information that they were sharing. It also, and then there's another side to that too, which is that perhaps it could be possible that the U.S. speculation, the U.S. intelligence community did not want to engage on certain topics with the Israelis from an intelligence perspective, because they didn't want to give the impression that there was policy approval. And so this is also another aspect.
That's very interesting. Can you just unpack that a little bit more about where you might see?
Sure. So
some specifics.
So if the NSC is saying we are going to take the boxing gloves off, we're gonna start getting more friendly with Iran. We're not going to do anything to provoke the Iranians. And if the nature of our intelligence relationships with Israel have been about pursuing Iran, taking action against Iran to make sure that they aren't putting U.S. interests at risk, and all of a sudden we're killing that off, you could see where the U.S.
So let me give you a specific example. Right. So if we had intelligence that showed that 500 Hamas fighters were receiving training on the ground inside Iran, we might not necessarily share that with the Israelis, because we wouldn't want to suggest to them that they should take action against Iran. When we are at a moment when we are working to
it's not just about us sharing information with them. I think what you said is right. It could also
but it's that kind of thing.
It could be we didn't want to ask. We may not have wanted to ask, because asking could have implied that we are willing to take a more provocative stance towards Iran.
Yeah.
And so
that's
I think
very interesting.
Right. So I think
all of this is who's listening out there. All of this needs to be investigated.
Right. I think. Unfortunately,
here's the new meme.
Well, unfortunately, this is one of the problems in today's Washington. Right. We don't really have congressional oversight anymore. It's really just kind of this partisan tit for tat.
Yeah.
I would have said, when you asked me who should look at this, I would have said, this is a great thing for the Intel oversight committees to look at.
Yeah.
But I don't have faith in that anymore.
After this is a bit more of an abstraction away from the concrete, although you can provide examples maybe to argue your case one way or another. But the creation of the DNI, the ODNI, was not uncontroversial. How do you think it's fared over the years? Is this the right bureaucratic institutional setup for the intelligence community? What are the drawbacks and strengths of it?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say I think there's a lot of hostility towards DNI from the Republican side of the aisle. A lot of people see it as an unnecessary bureaucracy. I think that that's true to some extent in its current formulation. However, I believe that the DNI plays a very, very important role to make sure that CIA doesn't essentially run wild. However, what you have now is DNI is mostly populated by CIA bodies. So the CIA has done a very good job of
taking over
basically taking over
One of its best operations in years.
Of taking over.
It's what I've always felt about us.
Their priorities.
We're not so good at deceiving others, but we're really great at deceiving ourselves.
Look, the one entity that was supposed to be kind of this neutral arbiter inside of the IC, making sure that the right missions were resourced, that they were performing correctly. That's a great target if you're trying to further your bureaucratic interests. And I think that that's unfortunately what happened. Look, I would reduce. I think there's a lot of things at DNI that don't need to be there. However, I think it does play an important role. Look, we have a crisis of oversight when it comes to the intelligence community. So much of it is so highly classified that it's very hard to perform oversight. And I think that that's really where DNI could be very helpful. But it needs to have its own staff. It should not be reliant on the people it's supposed to be overseeing to perform its core functions.
Although with the big intelligence leak, specifically on Ukraine, where you had a rolling set of Washington Post drip type stories, the classification system itself has been up for review, right? Which is to say, the trend would be towards perhaps fewer people having access to high-level intelligence, but I can't imagine they would want to lower the levels of classification or the amount of material that's classified.
So first of all, we don't have time to go into this because it's a really esoteric, long conversation. But what I'd say is certain things actually do need to be classified at lower levels, and especially in the Ukraine context, right? Like we saw this exceptional or this extraordinary executive action where the president came in and just declassified things that were otherwise very, very highly declassified to release publicly in an effort to try to, deter the Russians. I mean, obviously, ultimately, it didn't work, or maybe it caused the Russians not to engage in certain actions that they would have otherwise. But I think one of the issues we have is we cannot share adequately with our closest allies and partners now because we are overclassifying certain things. So we need to be much more careful about how things are classified. Now, there's a second problem, and you mentioned, the leaking. Well, that is I view is largely a technology problem these days. We need to get much better at tracking anomalous behavior of people that have access to classified information. Like this guy that was part of the National Guard wing that leaked this information. I mean, there was a lot of anomalous behavior there that's now come out. And I think if we were better at autonomously detecting that on his IT usage, I think we would have found out pretty quickly that he was up to something no good. So there are kind of two issues there, okay. Peter. Yeah.
Let me take you back. This conversation sparked a question in my mind. At the beginning of on the eve of the war in Ukraine, the administration did declassify all that intelligence in an effort to deter Putin. And they were extremely proud of themselves. And as far as I can tell from their comments after the war began, they remained proud of themselves as if this was some kind of an achievement. I really never understood that. Can you explain to me why what led them to see, what gave them such a sense of a win and of an innovation there?
Yeah. So when I look at that, I actually see a failure, right? Because one, we should have never gotten to the point where the Russians were about to invade Ukraine that forced our hand. Yeah. Revealing information that comes from extremely sensitive sources, potentially putting those sources at risk, whatever type of sources they are, whether it's a human source or a technical source, is not something to be proud of, right? Our hand was forced. They took action. I'm not going to second guess the decision, but I don't like that we were in that position to begin with.
They're much less boastful about their read on how the opening days of the war would go. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say something, about that I think we might have had a one-on-one conversation about this a long time ago, Peter. But the reality is, my view on what happened with Ukraine is that towards the end of the Trump administration, we had reached a level of activity with Ukraine that I believe was successfully deterring Russia. President Trump really, and his administration did actually quite a good job of that, despite what people say and all this BS Russiagate stuff. The Russians were not going to go into Ukraine. But while I was at the Pentagon,
just for our viewers, listeners, I want to explain that BS is a short for poppycock.
That's right, poppycock.
Yeah.
By the way, I use poppycock online, and a lot of people I got a lot of weird reactions to that. But
sounds like a word our current president would use.
Yeah. But you know,
malarkey.
I will tell you, when I was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict, look, if you look at what we did, I mean, we were pushing the envelope on deterring Ukraine, and we were doing it with our allies and partners. We publicly released the resistance operating concept, which I think is the roadmap. It just kind of tells you what we were up to. It's public. We put irregular warfare really as a top thing that the department was doing. And I'll tell you, I mean, at the time, I had conversations with people that, Laura Cooper is one perfect example. Laura was constantly coming to my staff saying, all of these activities that you're doing with Russia, you have to stop it. We are going to provoke the Russians into a war, and we have to. You have to stop this. There's going to be a nuclear war if you do this X, Y, and Z. And of course we did it, and nothing happened. It's just kind of like with moving the embassy. You move the embassy, there's going to be a war. That was the bureaucratic kind of like common knowledge, and so we went ahead anyway. Well, administration turns over. Next thing you know, Laura's acting under Secretary of Defense for Policy. And all of a sudden there's this zero-based review on what the U.S. is doing in Ukraine with the Russians. And they put on pause a lot of the activities that were, I believe, deterring Russia. And she paused them under the idea of this review. And what did we get? That was at the same time, by the way, remember, Putin is massing forces on the border. And so the Russia hands in the government, these policy experts, are saying, oh, they're massing forces on the border because of our provocative activities. And they rolled a lot of them back. We blinked. That was the blink that I believe invited Putin to
There's no doubt that real quick, the summer buildup was a test run for the invasion, and I think it was primarily meant to get a read on how, if, and where the U.S. would respond. And
we stood down. We stopped the NATO exercises.
Right.
We cut the number of special operation training missions that we had in Ukraine down to almost zero.
This is why you shouldn't have people in high-level policy positions that haven't had the shit beat out of them on the playground.
Right. Well, now
this is really the R-rated version of Counterbalance. Here
well, I apologize. I apologize to all of you for my potty mouth. I don't know what's happened to me today.
But Peter, I just want to say one thing to this, right? Because this is really, really important for people to understand, right? We blinked at the worst possible time. And we could not have played our hand any worse. And so the fact that we are now saying, well, they had to release this intelligence and it's such an innovative and great thing, they should have never been in that position to begin with. They were put in that position by career people that, by the way, and I want to explain why this happened. I think it's very important. If you study Russia your entire career, you lose perspective. And unfortunately, the Russia experts we have in government, they have been on Russia so long that they believe what the Russians want them to believe. They start buying into this idea that there's going to be a nuclear war if we do even the smallest little thing. They lost perspective.
This is why Mike always says professors and academics who spent their life thinking about an area really shouldn't be in the policy game.
Except me.
Oh, apologies.
Where are we at the end here?
I think we're at the end of our rope here.
Let me ask one more question. Well, maybe you already answered it. Why are they so proud of that policy, though? Where does that pride come from? I really never understood it.
Is the release of information?
Yeah. I feel like
yeah.
they really felt like this was something big that they did.
Well, I think that it was extremely unusual to see that sort of information put out that quickly. It's not a surprise that Russia, being one of the leading threats to the United States, is very high intelligence priority. Obviously, the Russians are very capable, have a very capable intelligence capability. So we closely guard the information that is about Russia. So I think they were just proud of the fact that
they overcame all of the bureaucratic obstacles.
They overcame all the bureaucratic obstacles
to releasing secrets.
Correct.
Well, and it's masking what Ezra just said. It's masking that we have a major war breaking out in a tier 1 region of the world under their watch by making a process argument, essentially.
Okay.
Anyway, Ezra, thanks so much for
a lot of fun,
joining us on Counterbalance.
You're welcome. I hope you'll have me back.
Please.
I hope not. The first time was after Afghanistan. This one after Gaza.
No,
What's next?
It was during the withdrawal.
Okay.
And actually, we were talking about an intelligence failure there too. So anyway, the adults are back in charge, so we should all.
Yeah, I feel very happy about that.
And only adults should listen, given Counterbalance After Dark with Mike Doran's potty mouth.
I apologize to everyone. I'll make up for it next time with a much cleaner language.
All right. See you all next time.
Great, Peter. Thanks.
Thanks.